What's up? What is up? It is your boy, RC Apologist, and this is Theological Discussion. And of course, I'm your host. Well, I think I've already said my name. Anyways, we are here on what is it? It's August 16th. It is a Thursday, and well, we're going to be having as the title suggests, theological discussion. If you people haven't been watching this show enough already, y'all should know, like, you judge a book by its cover. That's what we're going to have. It's right there in the title. So, yeah. Point being, though, is that this discussion is going to be with someone that I have responded to concerning one article that was mentioned a while back in one of the live streams that we had done. And now we're actually going to discuss another topic, but this time we actually have the person on here is known on the internet as Christian Apologist. Yes, basically my name, but without the R, and puts articles out on a blog, also known on Twitter as SJ Thomason. And this person is a female Christian apologist, has wrote articles dealing with certain issues, and has even contributed a major compilation article in response to something I actually responded with, which was called the views of, the whole atheists making questions that theists couldn't answer and all that stuff. Yeah, she made a major compilation article on that, in which other people were involved. So anyways, without further ado, and trying to act like I'm impressive and that I know a lot of things, here's the person of the hour. It is SJ, or what do you want to be called? Do you want to be called SJ, Christian Apologist? What is your preference?
I like SJ.
Okay, SJ then. Like that. That sounds a lot easier. All right, so SJ, the discussion that I think that we have in mind for the topic is concerning the issue of the whole determinism, not from the secular perspective, but rather the issue of the free will debate, specifically and strictly from the biblical Christian point of view, as you've expressed on Twitter, and I think in your one article dealing with this, you've expressed what I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, the view of libertarian free will. If I'm wrong, could you clarify then on what your position is?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I do endorse libertarian free will. I feel like we have free will to make decisions, but our free will is let me explain my position on determinism before I go into my position on free will, if that's okay. Can I do that? Should I call you RC?
Yeah, sure, and that's fine.
Okay, so I have been investigating this for a while because it is I mean, we have a lot of different Christian perspectives in a lot of aspects. And before I say much, I want to say that we all share, at least you and I and most Christians I know, tend to share the idea that Jesus did resurrect. He was born of the Virgin Mary. He suffered, died, and was buried. And on the third day, he rose in fulfillment of the scriptures. So I think that you and I can come together on that agreement that that occurred. And that's the core part of our beliefs. Now we have these tangential part of our beliefs, and in those tangential areas, I think that's where you and I might have a little bit of disagreement, and that's with respect to things like determinism. And so my take on determinism is, I'll start off with the biological form of determinism, because that's the one that was discussed by Sam Harris, and that's what a lot of atheists tend to look to say that we have no free will. Richard Dawkins endorses that form, and he says basically we're a product of our genes. We're a product of our genetics. So we're genetically predisposed to have certain personality characteristics. For example, there have been studies. There's a person called Iles, I-L-I-E-S, who wrote in the Journal of Organizational Behavior, and he spoke about personality characteristics that we're likely to inherit based on if our parents have those characteristics. And that speaks to, for example, things like altruism. So altruism is one of the five-factor, it's part of the five-factor model of five-factor model of personality domains, and altruism out of a bunch of people. One of them is called McRae, but basically altruism is something that you're likely to inherit. So from that aspect, there are certain things that you might do that are characteristic or could be predicted, or even we could look at probabilities based on your personality composition and your DNA. But that's biological determinism. Theological determinism is the form saying that God, and I think your view on this is that God preordained our actions. Now, he did stack the deck in a way, because he certainly has laid out our path, and he has given us certain predispositions via our biology. However, I wouldn't say that he's determined he's laid out the path, but he hasn't determined our choices whether or not we go down that path. And so that's where you and I think, differ with that, is the idea that God has not only laid out our path, but he's also guided our steps. I would say that he's laid out the path, and then we have the choice if we want to take those steps.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that's your position?
That's my position. So, and
Okay.
I actually, let me add one more thing. Lately, I've been studying Molinism, and I find that rather fascinating, but I haven't studied it enough to really be able to speak to it too much today. But I have studied that, and that seems to be pretty consistent with my position.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed there's a lot of people that are definitely into Molinism these days. So concerning that, you said that there's a plan laid out, and then we could take, or like there's a path laid out, and we could take. Let me ask this: could we take something that is opposite of the path that's been laid out?
Sure. So God might have planned. He might have laid out a certain path, and actually, that's sort of how. Well, let's speak to atheists. God has laid out a path for everyone to be able to find him, but many atheists have chosen to not go down that path, and that's a choice that they made. Now, did God know that they were going to choose not to go down the path that he had offered them? He's in every case through John 3:16, he says, I am offering everyone in the world the choice to follow Jesus and the choice to accept Jesus in their hearts. And some people don't choose that. Now, God does know that, because he is concurrently in our past, present, future, and he has these different forms of knowledge. He knows what we would do given the particular path that he's laid out. He knows if he were to lay out, he lays out the perfect path, looking at the entire world and all of the population from the very beginning of time to the very end of time. He's laid out a path that is going to have the most utilitarian value in the end. So he's given people the opportunity to choose to walk down that path. However, if they don't make that choice and they choose to walk down a different path, he knows that they've already done that, because he can see what they would, could, and will do given certain circumstances and given their genetic predispositions.
Okay. So concerning what you said about that people can choose a path that is different than what the Lord has established, then how do you deal with verse like Job 42, verse 2, in which Job says to the Lord, in his reply back, um, the passage that says, I know that you can do everything and that no thought can be withholden from me. That's in the King James, though the Christian Standard Bible says, I know that you can do anything and no plan of yours can be thwarted. How do you deal with that particular passage that says that no plan of God's, of Yahweh's, can be thwarted, meaning that nothing opposite can be done concerning what has been laid out in the plan?
I think you have to take that in the overall plan for the overall planet. I think that the Lord has a plan for the entire human race and all of humanity. And in that plan, we can't go and thwart God's plan to make sure that people reach their salvation, his children reach Jesus. But that particular verse, if you take that in context and look at Proverbs 16:9, it says, in their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. So in that way, I see that the Lord it's kind of like a parent. Like I have plans that my kids are going to go to college, and I've actually, I've been paying tuition, getting that ready for them. Not tuition, I'm sorry. I've been paying, and I'm going to get free tuition based on my college. But I've been paying for their room and board and doing all that stuff in preparation. I'm preparing, I'm giving them the foundation, the Christian foundation, and I'm giving them other sort of foundational pieces of knowledge, making sure they have a good education and that. So I'm laying it all out, and I'm hoping that they do well in college, but I can't, I'm hoping, I'm giving them all of the tools to do as well as they can, but I'm not sure if they'll do well. And I'm not like the Lord. The Lord does know what's going to happen. But in my particular case, I'm just saying, as a parent, you lay out their path, and you're not sure if they're going to take certain steps.
Hmm. Right. So But in that analogy, are you saying that in that case that you're a god? Oh, if we're referring to the analogy in comparison between parent and child?
Yeah, I'm trying to make the analogy between parent and child, and I'm just saying the only way I'm not trying to say at all I'm God. Obviously, I'm way far from it.
Well, I'm not
What
trying to
I'm
say
trying
that
to
you
say is
are, but I'm
no.
trying
I'm
to
trying to
point
say
out.
that the Lord sets our path. He sets a path that makes the most sense given all of the circumstances and the fact that He knows what's going to happen. He knows what's happened yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He's transcendent. He's concurrently in our past, present, future. So He lays out the path for the human race. And
Mhm.
and that's basically what he does. And again, in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. It's very consistent with my view.
Right, but the thing is that that passage also is consistent with the view of determinism because we agree that, you know, man is able to make decisions. However, his decisions are limited to that of what his will is. There are people who cannot please God because of the fact that they are in the flesh and they are not born again. They are by nature children of wrath, and they desire to do the things that please only themselves in the flesh, versus one that would be born again and has a nature that desires to please the Lord, and such. So we have no doubt that people do plan their actions and such, but in order for them to even uh, move or to even have that establishment, God has to give them the ability, the permission to even, you know, that's what the whole passage says, that in their minds they plan their chart of actions, their course of actions. But in order for them to actually move and establish it, then that's the deeds of the Lord. And in fact, if we go elsewhere within the Proverbs and what it talks about, we see a lot of things that point out of similar nature. For example, lot being the dice that was used back then in Proverbs 16:33, the lot is cast into the lap, but the whole disposing of it is from Yahweh, it's from Jehovah, it's from the Lord. So that while things that seem random, is like the toss of a dice, are casted, the disposing, the outcome has been determined already by the Lord. And then Proverbs 20:24 says that man's steps are of Jehovah, meaning that the steps and such that was mentioned earlier, these steps that are occurring are of Yahweh, are of Jehovah. And then it says, how can a man then understand his own way? So I think if we look at the entirety of the passages in Proverbs, and another one I'll just give, Proverbs 21, verse 1, the king's heart is in the hand of Jehovah as the rivers of water. He turns it wherever he will. And the he is in the capital. So the context is in reference that the one that's turning this heart that's in the hand is Yahweh, is God, that's turning the heart however he wants and wherever he wills it to go. So I think if we look at all of the passages that deal with this, I think we come to a conclusion, including the one that you mentioned, that it is indeed God, that while we have the ability to make decisions, we're still limited, and it's ultimately God who establishes what will happen in the end.
And you and I are in agreement with that. I do believe, of course, God establishes everything, and you and I are both on the same page as far as God does draw us in. So, just to give a little example from my own history, is for many years I was searching. I was sort of a wishy-washy Christian, and God made Himself very clear to me not too many years ago, and He really drew me in, and He changed me completely. And I've done a 180 turnaround in my life, and there's lots of
Mhm.
different things that I've done. But I want to give also a couple of verses I think that are consistent with the idea that we have some control here. Um, he said, for example, in Galatians 5:16-17, so I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They're in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. But you have a choice. So in many verses, it says that we do have a choice, and that some basically walk away from the Lord. Like even in Romans 10:9-10, if you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified. It is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. So I think that the idea, I think, is we have to take that first step and just sort of open our minds to Jesus, which I did a few years ago. Well, more than a few now, but I did a while back, maybe 6-7 years ago, and then God. It was like when I love the analogy or the story, basically, when Jesus told the apostles on the boat, he said, throw the net out there, throw it out there into the ocean, and see what happens. And they said, I haven't been fishing all day long. We're tired. We're hungry. We just want to go back. You're not catching any fish. And he said, just throw it out there. Have a little faith. Throw it out there. And so they threw the net out, and in came a whole pile of fish. And I think we can compare that to the idea that if we put a little bit of faith in God, just a little, and say, Jesus, I'm open if you want to come into my heart, and then just see what happens. And it's fascinating, and he'll come into our hearts. And my point is, I think the thing is, you and I both agree that God has control. I mean, he does have control over this entire plan and humanity and the human race. He knew when Judas Iscariot, I mean, they knew, he had foreknowledge of what Judas Iscariot was going to do. He knew that putting Judas in the position that he put him in, Judas basically would make the choice to betray Jesus. And he showed many times how he did betray Jesus. So the Lord knew that. And the whole situation was sort of under his control. Now, could Judas have done something other? Well, no, Judas had already decided. This was in Judas's heart to make the decisions he made. And of course, he regretted it later.
Well, I would also comment that not only, did he know that Judas would, betray Jesus given the circumstances, but that he placed and ordained Judas to be the one who would do that, so that the action was ordained, because otherwise you have passages where it says that he was slain before the foundation of the world, meaning before the created order of the world. Acts 4. Verse 27 also says, "For truly against your holy child Jesus, whom you have anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the nations and the people of Israel, were gathered together in order to do whatever your hand and your counsel determined before to be done." So the crucifixion of Jesus was determined before to be done by the hand and the counsel of God Almighty. And to focus on the issue of Galatians, go into Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 16. It says, "This I say then, walk in the Spirit," in which he is writing this to the church, to the people that are in the Galatians of the church, "and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." So he's telling these people that, if you walk in the Spirit, that if you are born again believers and you walk in the Spirit, you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that you would. But if ye be led of the Spirit, you are not under the law. So what we're basically seeing here is that concerning this, if you have the Holy Spirit, then you have the will and the desires to go against what the flesh says. But according to passage, I remember there's the one I cited that was about for the man, the natural man cannot discern the things of the Spirit of God. So there's a thing he can't do of his own will. He can't discern the things of the Spirit of God. This is 2 Corinthians or 1 Corinthians 2:14 that it mentions this of the thing he can't do. And according to what we also see in John chapter 6, for example, another thing that literally says that man can't do it of his own, says, "No man, oudais dunatai in the Greek," which literally means no one has the ability to come to me except that the Father which has sent me draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day. So in order for the person to even come to Jesus, the Father has to draw him to Jesus, because it says oudais dunatai in the Greek. No man can come. No one has the ability to come to Jesus. So there are things that the Bible does say that in a natural state, man is limited unless he is born again, which is what we also see in John 3 concerning what Jesus says, that a man must be born again. He cannot, there's the other ability thing there, he can't see or enter or even see the kingdom unless he is born again. So I think those are very important issues that deal with that, along with the determinism, is the fact that our will is limited and it's not totally free and autonomous.
Well, let me go to that because you said something that I think I agree with, and I want to first build off what we agree with. I
Mhm.
agree with the fact that we can't discern God. We have a I'd love to be able to figure God out. I mean, we
Well,
can't.
well, that,
We have
well, that's
our minds are not even nearly. I mean, our minds are a puny little speck compared to the mind of the Lord. So
well, that's
for
not
us
what
to
I
even
said, though. That's not what I said, though. I didn't say that no human being on face of the planet can comprehend God. But what I specifically said in First Corinthians, it says that the natural man, which the term there is referring to, that who is an unbeliever, who is not regenerate, who's not born again, receives not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them because they are spiritually discerned. So it's not talking about, like, for example, me and you who are born again believers, but rather this is dealing with, say, uh, the godless cranium, the godless engineer, the atheist, or the natural man who has not received the things of the Spirit of God. So unless this goes back again to John 3, where we're talking about that they have to receive the Spirit of God, be born again. Otherwise, he then can't know the things of the Spirit of God because they are spiritually discerned, and you have to have a spirit, the Holy Spirit, in order to discern these things. That's what I was saying. Not that nobody can uh, study and discern.
Okay, that's fair enough. I completely agree with you, and I know that there are many many verses where it says you need to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. So uh, can, can sort of cover the eyes if people so desire. If people desire, according to Romans 1, to work against the Lord, and if they desire to pursue the sins of the flesh, God can basically let them have their way. He has let them have their way, and he basically would, just like he did with Pharaoh, he would cover the eyes, and people would Pharaoh. He did that a few different times. It wasn't like a one-time shot. He would cover the eyes of Pharaoh so Pharaoh could pursue the sins of the flesh and the ways that he wanted to live. So God does do that. I agree with you. I wanted to say something though that I think you
Mhm.
also mentioned. Did God know, for example, that Jesus was going to die in the way he did? Did he position Judas and Pontius Pilate exactly where he did when this occurrence was going to happen because he knew exactly how they would act under those circumstances? I believe he did. And Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22, as you're well aware, predicted Jesus' crucifixion around Isaiah around 700 years before Christ was born, and Psalm around 1,000 years before Christ was born. They very well spelled out Jesus' crucifixion. So God knew of
Mhm.
these events and had uh, pre-planned the entire pathway towards Jesus' resurrection. So positioning Pilate where he did, God knew how he would act, how he could act, and how when if he were in that position, Jesus knew how Pontius will act when Jesus was in the position. Jesus knew how, just to speak about will, could, and would, because this is actually consistent with Molinism, is the idea of will, would, and could. Again, would being he knows how you would act if you're put in certain circumstances. He knows how you could act given your genetic predispositions, and he knows what you will do. Just like he knew when he told Judas in the Last Supper, "Go ahead and do what you're going to do." So
Mhm.
he knows exactly what people are going to do. And Jesus demonstrated many times that he had foreknowledge of the actions of his apostles, telling Peter, "You're
Mhm.
going to deny me 3 times," and that kind of thing. He knew what he was going to do.
Mhm. Right. But here's the thing: does he know um, of these actions because he ordained them, or because these things occurred in the future, and there's some other cause of these actions that they are doing? I think that's the main.
Yeah, I think you and I are on the same page with a lot of this stuff. And I think what you're saying is, does he know because he ordained it? Where you and I differ is where I have a very strong feeling of disagreement with Calvinism in general is
Mhm.
I feel as if, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I am wrong, please correct me. I feel as if Calvinism takes away some of the accountability for the individual by saying, there's really nothing you can do if you were happen to be born in this perfect position where God loves you and he preordained you and he's going to bring you to heaven. Good for you. But if you weren't picked, you weren't selected prior to coming here on this earth, well, that's just too bad. And there's nothing really you can do about it. And that's my problem with Calvinism. And please correct me
Mhm.
if I've misinterpreted it.
Well, I think you have, because there's, for the most part, we affirm actually accountability, and in fact, There is a good booklet that's available for free, rather in PDF, or they ship it to you on Chapel Library, that literally deals with this subject that was written by not sure if you're familiar with his name, J.I. Packer.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've heard of him.
He wrote a book. There's a booklet that is out on there, which, if I'm not mistaken, the actual thing is taken from his book called Evangelism and the Sovereignty of God, which is a classic work of his published by University Press. But in that booklet that's free to get, it is titled Divine Sovereignty and Human Responsibility, where he deals with where some people like to think that it is a contradiction, that God is in complete 100% control over the things that occur, especially in the worldview of Calvinism. And yet man is still 100% fully accountable for the actions he does. The fact is that God, while he has determined things, man is still acting on his own decisions and actions. He's acting according to his nature. And as a result, he is still held accountable for the things that he has done, no different than, someone in a court of law that has established a law. And if someone breaks the law, you have to pay the penalty for it. And so when someone violates the law of God, then you have to be held accountable for that, regardless of whether or not the issue of, things have been determined. In the same way that people like to say that it's no longer a choice if things have been determined, even though that, for example, if I am having a craving for something, and that is limiting my choices and is more so a determining of what I'm going to decide to eat, that doesn't negate the fact that I still made a choice. I just chose based on my own inclinations and nature to choose what I desired and what I wanted. So in that sense, that's what we Calvinists affirm concerning the issue of the will and decision making, and we should still be held accountable, even holding to that, for determinism and moral accountability for the actions that we have committed, especially in the case of sin.
So what's your take on people who, and I'm just wondering, because I see people in the chat, and I also know you mentioned a couple of people. I think you said Godless Cranium and a couple of other people. What's your take on people who maybe were raised in the Christian faith and left? Do you think that, do you think they have a chance? Is there some, according to your doctrine or your beliefs, do you think that they can turn back, or do you think sort of that God's already preordained their actions and there's no chance for them? What would you say?
Well, I would say that kind of both. I mean, the issue is that God has determined what's going to happen, but ultimately we don't know the end results of the plan. I think this is a Deuteronomy 29:29 issue concerning that, and what we're simply told to do is to proclaim the gospel. We don't know that, say, for example, you could have someone like, say, for example, a Greg Kokel or an apologist today. And I'll give an even stronger example. Like, say you have a Max Colby, the guy of the Red Pill Religion, and one day he turns back into an atheist and then eventually dies an atheist. That would be determined just in the same way that if you have someone like Godless Cranium or Godless Engineer, or even to go into more of the spotlight, say you have Richard Dawkins, who, let's say, in the last 2 years of his life converts to Christianity, remains a Christian, and dies a Christian. That is still determined, and that would, in that case, make Richard Dawkins part of the elect, versus, then you have someone who wouldn't be elect in the analogy with Max Colby at that point. So you have these analogies to display that it's all about ultimately what happens at the end, and we have to simply trust that God is in control. And the only way that we can ultimately know that if someone is of the elect is if they are believers, because it says in John 3:16 that whoever believes is going to be saved, whereas John 3:18 says that whoever does not believe, he stands condemned already, because of, one, his sins, and the second part that it mentions in there is because he does not believe in the name of the Son of God. And so it's about belief that is the ultimate identifier of one who is elect, and as well as the perseverance of these people. Will they have falling aways and then eventually still remain believers, or will they completely be out of it? And as Hebrews says, that these are people who, or not Hebrews, I think it's Peter, which identifies them as people who were not really of the church, because if they were of the church, they would have never actually left.
And actually, I agree with you on that. I think that, again, going even to my own history and also the history of some people and some of the reasons why I've written some of the things I've written is I look at what happened when I was raised. I was raised a Catholic, and my whole family, except for my sister, left the Catholic Church. And now we're seeing more scandals with the Catholic Church, and it's driving me crazy. But
Hmm.
and Max Kolbe comes from the Catholic perspective now. He was actually raised in the Protestant faith, and he left, became an atheist, and came back to Christianity through Catholicism. So I don't condemn Catholicism at all. I think that people can choose their own paths. However, in that particular case, with what happened with me, is I wasn't saved when I was a Catholic. I believed in Jesus, but I was a weak believer. And then I even left to the point where when I was in my early 20s, I decided that I started thinking the New Age Christianity was more interesting. And then it turned into New Age spirituality. And then it turned into looking at things that were written by people like Wayne Dyer in his book, Your Sacred Self. And I started thinking, if you get enough into that sort of perspective, you start gliding away from Jesus and gliding away from the resurrection, and you glide into this perspective where suddenly you're almost a pantheist. And if you keep doing it enough, you can actually turn into an atheist, where you're a Buddhist atheist, and that's sort of where that spirituality movement leads. And so I wasn't saved. I don't believe I was saved at that point. I don't think I had a chance. And then in my early 40s, suddenly, boom. I had this experience where God made himself very known. Jesus made himself very known. I had a bunch of experiences that I really can't deny. And now I think I was saved. I went and had baptism again. I was baptized a while back in my church, and for the second time, I was baptized as an infant, but I decided I had to be baptized again. And in that point, I think I was saved. And I'm just saying that there are a lot of people who I don't want to be like that person. I see a few people on the thing, true believers, and I always worry about that whole no true Scotsman. But my fear is that people can easily fall away. One thing I fear is when the Christian people in different Christian groups start saying, hey, mine is better than yours and mine's better than yours. And I think God can choose us from wherever we come from, whichever walk. He can walk in and say, okay, well, you're a Catholic, and you know what? I'm going to save you. Or you're a Presbyterian, I'm going to save you. And you're a whatever it is. I follow the Baptist faith. You're a Baptist, I'll save you. So he can pick. I mean, I was coming out of a Catholic / New Age crazy sort of belief, and next thing I know, God stepped in and basically went boom. So that's all my point. I worry about being divisive in these different Christian faiths, because I worry that it drives people away, and I want to see what we can do to rope everyone in.
Well, I mean, I would say that there are some denominations that I think can't be roped in terms of like a form of unity. Like, I think to mix the Roman Catholic Church within the Protestant and the Eastern Orthodox with the Protestant is like trying to mix oil and water together. I think that causes a lot of problems, and ultimately a self-destruction, because they contradict and disagree on the most essential of issues. But going to the
Wait, let's go back. What are the essential, I'm looking at the two groups. What are the essential issues to you that they would disagree on that would make it so it's oil and water?
Well, concerning the issue of faith and salvation, they say, according to the Catholic, in the Council of Trent, for example, going to the Catholic Church, they believe that to say that and believe that we are justified by faith alone, one who says this and believes this is to be anathema, means to no longer be a part of the church, is considered a heretic to proclaim sola fide, that we are justified by faith, which is one of the doctrines that was reestablished and revitalized during the Protestant Reformation, of which the Council of Trent and the Canons of Trent tried to respond towards, was Luther's whole thing there. They also tried to add to Scripture by including the Apocrypha, which was never meant to be viewed as canonical scriptures, and they used that as a source to then go to infallible sources to come to the conclusion of doctrine, as well as they even take the issue of Mary to the level, and I discussed this in one of my video highlights, to the level that it does indeed raise her up to the level of godlike, a goddess-like status, as even some of the things like Catholic scholar Alphonsus Ligori notes about one of the several things that they believe about Mary, that she participated in the forgiveness of sins, and that she, along with Jesus suffering on the cross for his as being participating in the atonement, Mary also helped atone for sins by watching her son suffer on the cross, and that her suffering of watching her son die on the cross, and that also contributes to the salvation of human beings to God, as well as that she is able to hear and receive prayers from everybody that can then be given to God, which one has to be having omni attributes, which is an attribute that can only be given to God. So this would therefore elevate Mary to a goddess-like status, and that is something we shouldn't be doing, considering what the Bible says about going after other gods, as well as putting people up that are just simply human and making them out to be divine when they've never claimed that. So those are some essential issues that I would take up with.
Can I answer some of those? Because
I
I, being raised a Catholic, I think I can speak to some of that stuff pretty well. I think it's more the leaders in some of the churches who have actually tried to set this whole thing of, going to Lord via faith versus via works. And they've tried to establish a wedge between believers by saying, well, you're going to be the one who's saying it's by faith alone, or you're going to be the one who says it's by works. Going to church as a Catholic and being in Catholic grade school from kindergarten through the 8th grade, and then going to a Catholic high school for my freshman year, we never talked about the distinction between whether or not we're going to be able to be saved because we're focusing mainly on works. That wasn't part of the faith. The faith was worshiping Jesus Christ and learning all about the New Testament. Now, I'll give you the fact that the Catholics don't investigate the Old Testament, but that wasn't part of our main doctrine. Our main doctrine was focusing on Jesus, his resurrection, the crucifixion. Now, going back to Mary, that's a whole different point. And it's interesting because when I did become a Baptist, I started investigating my Catholic faith much deeper, because I wanted to understand why they came to some of the positions they came to with certain things like going to the priest for forgiveness and that sort of thing. No meat on Friday, and a few other things that I found inconsistent with the Bible. So I did find some stuff. And as far as Mother Mary, I want to mention her. It's a strange situation for me to speak on Mother Mary, because I do Hail Mary. I believe that the angel Gabriel said, "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus." I feel that she would be a very clean vessel, probably, if not close to being sin-free. I would think she would be sin-free, and I would think she was elevated by Gabriel to be among the angels, more of an angel walking on earth, and that's how I view her. Now, I don't view her as a god or a goddess. I view her as an angel who was a sacred vessel for the Lord Jesus. And I think that, I don't want to say she atoned. I do want to say that she certainly suffered watching her son on the cross, just as all of the other women and Jesus' other followers suffered.
So you believe that Mary would be sinless or sin-free?
I don't think that my belief whether Mary's sin-free should make any difference as far as whether or not I'm a credible witness to Jesus.
Okay.
I believe in Jesus. I believe Jesus is far superior to Mother Mary. I believe that their Trinity is far superior to Mother Mary. The problem is some people who misinterpret Catholic faith actually think that Mary, the Trinity, is the Father, Mary, and Jesus. I've actually heard that from people, which I think is sad, because people really don't understand our faith.
Well, that's the Islamic view of the Trinity.
Yeah.
So concerning that, though, about Mary being sinless or sin-free, is there a biblical passage that identifies this?
The passage that I use, and I'm forgetting the exact word, I want to say it's Kachaterom, when the angel appeared in front of Mary and said, "Hail Mary, full of grace." The word "full of grace," where else in the Bible is someone else told that they are, an angel approaches and says "hail," which is basically using the word, kachateron, I think is the word. And that particular word is used once in the entire Bible. And it's a way to elevate someone to a higher status. And the fact that the angel Gabriel, who is at a very high status among angels, elevated Mary and said she's full of grace, speaks volumes to me. And also, I honestly feel that Mary has been a part of my life as well. And I'll admit that was more when I was a Catholic. I had that stronger belief, but I feel that Mary is an important part of this whole picture. And I think that I don't think that saying that Catholics aren't true Christians because they feel that a kinship to Mary is something that we should do. I think we certainly should elevate Jesus above Mary, because clearly he's the Son of Man. Mary was his mother, and I think that she's blessed and played a major role, and I would love to meet her one day.
Right, but the actual phrase "full of grace" in the Greek is pleros karitos, and this phrase that is "full of grace" is only referenced in 2 places in the New Testament, of which does not refer to Mary, and that is John 1:14 and Acts chapter 6 verse 8. The phrase used is I believe is what you mentioned, is charito, in which it simply means to be highly favored, which does not mean the same thing as being full of grace, plairas karitos. There's an article that was written from Matt Slick on Carm that goes into detail about this specific argument that has been used. And the fact is that it just simply means a favored one. It doesn't mean one that is full of grace as what Jesus is referenced, because it uses a different Greek word, and the context is definitely different. It's just, I can agree that she was highly favored, but even then, I don't see where that is talking about her being sinless in that particular passage, because we only know of one person who is sinless, and that was because he was divine. He wasn't stained by the human nature, of which Romans 3:23 says that all men have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And Romans 3 verses 10 to 12 state that no one does good in the sight of God, and such. So, I mean, again, there also goes the whole thing about where we are about on determinism, is that certain men, unless they are born again in their natural state, they cannot do things that are good, because of their totally depraved, totally unable state, and such. And even at one point says that there is no one who seeks after God. So the natural man can't even seek or go after finding God. It is the work of God himself that causes one to believe, as the passage says, or the song says, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, to save a wretch like me. I was once lost, but now I am found." It wasn't that this person was lost and was trying to find someone. This was someone who was lost, and that person was found, and that person was found by God. So that's why, interesting enough, from what I remember, "Amazing Grace" is actually was a hymn that was written by a Calvinist with Calvinist theology behind that particular hymn.
Okay, so I have the word. It's kacheritomine, and it says it depends on where you get the translations. If Matt Slick says it's translated one way, the Catholics say it's translated a different way. I don't think that that's something that really should. I mean, I'd rather not. You and I could just be splitting hairs here, trying to figure out which way that we should interpret that. There's a very large, significant portion of the world for centuries who have interpreted it in a different way, and it's fine if Matt Slick wants to interpret it the way he does. But I think we should turn over to one of your questions. Is you're bringing up, how do you explain the thief on the cross? Because was he born again? And then there's also the people who lived in before Jesus walked the earth, like for example Job. Obviously God chose them, and Job wasn't baptized.
Right. And I don't believe one has to be baptized to be saved. I believe it is by faith alone that is one is justified. And that's why actually the thief on the cross would kind of refute even the Catholic perspectives of, that you have to do a certain merit of deeds and such, because this person who was a wicked thief, he didn't believe in Jesus. He only believed in him for a few, if not like 2 minutes or so. remainder of his life on the cross, and all he did was believe on Jesus by asking, remember me whenever you go into your kingdom. And he says, today you will be with me in paradise, which is essential to know that that was actually, and this goes back to your other question, that this is where the Old Testament saints, because there was no in Old Testament going to heaven or hell. It was going to Sheol, and Sheol was split into two compartments, and Jesus and this guy would go to paradise, where Abraham and the prophets were, whereas the land of the wicked is where the people basically who would then go to hell later. That is reserved for them. So I agree that it's by faith, it's not by baptism. Which again, that's one of the things the Catholics teach, is the baptismal regeneration and justification. But I don't. I believe that we are justified by faith alone in Christ, and that it is a work of God for faith, since it does say in John 6, faith is a work of God.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Faith is a work of God. And I do believe that faith is, I mean, if I had to put one over the other, I would say faith is more important, because I think John 3:16 makes that a point. It's whoever believes in him shall be saved. So I think that that's a strong point. It's just, I think the particular steps we take to adhere to our beliefs are less critical to me than just really, truly opening your heart and accepting Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say, and since you brought up hell, I think that people like to talk about that a lot. So what would you say, what's your take on hell? Do you think, what do you think happens when people die? Now, the Catholics have, and I know this from growing up, as Catholics have a view on purgatory, which could be kind of consistent with the idea of there's a waiting period between dying and when the final judgment occurs. So I'm just curious on what your view is. And because people always ask me, and I'm sure you've been asked a zillion times on here, is, are people going to be eternally punished, or is there going to be, and when you say eternally punished, just tell me your view. I'm just curious.
Well, I believe that when people who are sinners who have not repented and turned to Christ, these people will be eternally punished in hell, where they are eternally separated from God in isolation from his holiness, and will simply be in what I believe is a pure eternal darkness, which is what hell is, of which they will be casted in there when the time comes, when it's because it says in the Bible that and death and Hades, which is the Greek equivalent of Sheol, is casted into the lake of fire, and this is the second death. This is what we see as the eternal hell that is mentioned.
Okay, yeah, you were actually on the same page on that then. I was curious.
Right. So let me ask you this. Have you ever read any Reformed literature, any Calvinistic literature?
No, I have to be honest, I haven't.
Right. So I would suggest, to look for, especially looking more into this, there's a book that I'm actually in the middle of reading. And again, this is another one that you can get literally for the cost of nothing, in either PDF or paperback form. And I'll send you the link for that. It's called The Sovereignty of God by A.W. Pink. And he pretty much it's not a extensive commentary or too much of a philosophical thought train on his own ideas. He's rather simply just citing the verse, briefly going over key words and phrases that are utilized in expounding on it, and as an expositor, and just allowing the word of God to speak. So allowing other people then to make their own conclusions. The only thing about this one that's only available is I believe this is the first or the second edition, whereas in the third or fourth revision, they had an additional appendix that was dealing with other passages that people try to use to say that God died for everyone, and that it refutes limited atonement. Like he goes over John 3:16. I believe it's, if I'm not mistaken, First John chapter 2, verse 2, where it says, "Not for the propitiation for our sins, and not for ours only, but also for the sins of the whole world." But he mostly deals with the issue of God being sovereign and man's will and how things are dealt with. I would recommend that one.
Let me and thank you. That's a good recommendation. I want to offer you the idea of I've been reading up on, and I mentioned this earlier today, is Molinism. I've been following William Lane Craig for a long time, and I would highly recommend anything that he writes. But besides him, I found a pastor online, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, that I've been watching lately in his
Are you
YouTube
referring to
videos.
Mike Winger?
Yeah, I really like him.
I've actually gotten a chance to talk with him before.
Yeah, I'm hoping to. He told me I have to wait till November. I'm low priority.
Yeah, well, he wasn't like that back then. He was definitely a lot more open. He wasn't as scheduled and reserved out as he was in the as he is now. Because I remember he would always be in like even just casual off-air hangouts with me and Rob from Sentinel Apologetics.
Yeah, I found him on Pine Creek Doug's channel. I was listening to Pine Creek Doug, and all of a sudden I see Mike, and I thought, wow, he's got some really good answers. I was so impressed. So I found his channel and started tuning into it. So
I'm actually surprised that he kept his up because when it came to Rob from Sentinel Apologetics, are you familiar with that ministry, by the way?
yes, I am. I haven't really followed it much though, but I'm familiar with it.
Well, there was a time that he was on there, and uh, after like about 2 or 3 days of that video being up, immediately Doug took it down. Um, and the reason for it is because he said that he was too boring and that Rob just wasn't really uh, someone that should be exposed out there. There's really no need for this guy to be getting much attention out there. But the real reason was because he was responding to all the questions, and Doug's just like, no, that's not it. That I disagree with that. Like it was, and I think at one point he even got booted out and kicked out of the Skype call that he was in, saying that they were done with him.
Oh, that's a tough crowd.
Yeah, and
I,
normally they don't do that.
I tell you what, I can say YouTube's getting pretty picky. I just saw a tweet. I mean, this is going off topic but just real fast, it kind of related, is Stefan Molyneux. He's an atheist I follow. I have a handful of atheists and a lot of Christians, but I follow him because I think he's highly intelligent and he's got some interesting opinions on certain things that I agree with and things I disagree with, but I like to hear that point too. But he just posted something on Twitter that says that in a period of 24 hours, he had 2 strikes on YouTube. And I know he's been posting things on Alex Jones, and he
Yeah.
posted something that he did over in New Zealand, where basically New Zealand kicked him out because he was talking about the people who were native to New Zealand, the Maori tribe, and I think that wasn't something that was favored. And he also went over to Australia and talked about the Aborigines, and that wasn't something viewed in positively. So basically, suddenly he has 2 strikes on YouTube. So the censorship is becoming rather interesting, and it makes me a little concerned because I wonder where, are we going to still have free speech 10 years from now, or are we going to suddenly have to really watch what we say to such an extent that we're worried completely about being politically incorrect and when we're just voicing our opinions?
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's going to definitely have to be some debate about that because I've been put on a block list and considered an alt-right Nazi by apparently a weird communist, anarcho-communist group of furries. Apparently, so they now labeled me a alt furry, which I'm neither of those things. So it's quite an interesting thing when you try to advocate for free speech. You're going to be accused of being a Nazi, and one person tried to report my channel, or not my channel, but my Twitter, and I got a strike there because apparently I had pointed out that the Quran or even the Hadith does say, and justify, going out and killing uh, gay people, and that's all that people are freaking out about a guy who's just simply stating that, and they're trying to call him a bigot when, hey, just read the Quran, read the Hadith. It says, if you find the people of Lot, which they identify as homosexuals by the scholars, you are to kill them. And the Hadith go further by even saying that you are to take them to the highest rooftop and throw them off. That is how you should properly kill it, as was interpreted by Ibn Abbas, who is considered by Islam to be the most accurate interpreter of the Quran. So this is supposedly from a very highly educated and divinely um, educated individual concerning the tafsir of the Quran. Um,
Well, and did you hear about Egypt right now is trying to take away the rights of people who are atheist? Egypt's trying to strip them of the rights right now and make it illegal to practice atheism.
there was a conversation that happened on a TV show. I don't know if you saw that, where they had someone they didn't even know was an atheist. They didn't even know what atheism was, and so the sheikh had to ask. Um, and after this guy tried to explain why, or what is an atheist. The host immediately said, "How can you say that? Like that's very irrational. That you're like got some mental delusion. You're sick in the head, and we need to check you into a psychiatric ward." I apologize, viewers, but we can't have this. We can't have this idiot on our show. And even the sheikh was like, "You need psychiatric treatment. We at the station will do our best to get you into one right now." So like it's that crazy over there concerning the world of skepticism that they think it's like something brand new, and they're having to, because they even had to ask, what is atheism? Like they've never even heard of that before.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's well, I look at people like Raif Badawi, and now his one of his relatives was also imprisoned in Saudi Arabia. And I don't know exactly what he said to get him imprisoned. I do know that he was airing his views on his Muslim faith, his non-Muslim faith, I should say, in Saudi
Mhm.
Arabia. And so he was charged with something like 75 whippings. I forget exactly how many whippings, but 10 years in prison. And he has kids and a wife, and he's been imprisoned in Saudi Arabia purely because of some blogs that he posted with views that were counter to being a Muslim.
Mhm. Right.
So it's sad. I mean, it's sad to look around the world and to see these kind of things in this day and age. When we
Mhm.
see this kind of stuff, it's I mean, Saudi just legalized the idea that women can drive a car. In June, women finally were able to legally drive a car. This to me is egregious. That it was 2018 when this finally occurs, and also, and I think that has to do with the fact, like you mentioned with the Quran, it says in the Quran that women have half the minds of men. And of
Yep.
course, as a woman, I take huge offense to that. And the nice thing about Christianity is the way that Jesus treated women. I mean, he had women come to the empty tomb. Women were the first to discover the empty tomb. I think he really treated women well, and I think that
Hmm.
speaks to the way that women today in Christian societies are given so many great equal rights.
Hmm. Right. All right. So we got about 15 minutes before we got to wrap things up here. So I want to tackle over again the main issue of what we were dealing with, though it was okay going over these various topics. Let me go back to John 6:44, because I think that's a key thing there. It says that no man can, which the phrase is "udais dunatai," which is that no one has the ability, no one has the capacity. Um, so translating that, no one has the ability to come to me except the Father, which has sent me, draws him. And so it's saying, so when I see that, especially focusing on the Greek, it is saying that none of us can come to Jesus unless it is the Father, which sent Jesus, draws him to Jesus. And then it says, then he will raise him up on the last day. What do you make of that passage where it
I
speaks of an
do.
inability?
I see. I don't believe it's an inability. I think that God does draw us, but I think we need to take the first step. I think if you look at verses like Joshua 24:15, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in this land who you are serving. But as for me and my
Right.
household, we will choose the Lord. We will serve the Lord. And then another verse, just to mention, it says in John 7:17, anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on
Hmm.
my own. And if another one, Mark 8:34, then he called the crowd to him along with his
Hmm.
disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple, whoever wants to be my disciple, it's not saying that must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. So to
Hmm.
me, if we take that in context with what you said, I think we take the first step, kind of with Jesus and the fishing net that we talked about earlier, and we open our minds and say, God, please draw your, please accept the fact that I'm willing to bring you into my heart, and then God draws a sin. That's my interpretation of the whole Bible,
Right.
basically.
Well, when you mentioned those verses, I could again. I think that's the thing. We read those and have different presuppositions because I could look at those and again see that those are affirmed in my case because the issue is about the will, and he says that uh, you choose. But what exactly is the very first statement in that Joshua passage?
The very first statement in Joshua is, "But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you," so it's
Yeah,
your
right there.
choice.
So it's undesirable. So for the person, if it seems undesirable to you, meaning that if you are in a capacity, you're in the will that does not desire God, then you are left in your choice, of which the only choice you can make is to serve the other gods of whom you desire that please your desires. That's where it says if serving the Lord seems undesirable. So it goes again back to the will and the desires. And the other passages.
But I don't think that that's saying that you don't have any choice. There's nowhere it says you have
I never
absolutely
said
no choice.
I never said that no one has a choice. I believe in decision making and choices, as I mentioned earlier in the program, is that I believe that our choices, however, are limited based upon our desires and the will that we have. If we have a will that is not born again, obviously we are going to choose, but we're going to choose things that aren't pleasing to him, which in that case of Joshua, they're going to choose those gods that were mentioned that many people chose at that time for their own selfish desires, whether it be the sexual orgies that happened in some of the Canaanite religions, some of the people that were so desperate looking for results in terms of agriculture and all that, that they were willing to sacrifice children for fertility, for example, and various other things. So you have these people looking for their own desires, and they're willing to follow after these different cultures and practices for the sake of that, for their own desires. That's why the key term is used as desirable. They're making choices based upon their desires. That's why it says if choosing God is undesirable, then you be in your choice to choose these others. And then the others about choosing to follow Christ. Again, only those who will then follow Christ and choose him are those who desire to, who have that knowledge to. And that's why I think we go to John 6:44, where it says that no man can come to me except that the Father which has sent me draws him. So meaning that no one has the ability, "Oudeis dunatai," again being the key Greek phrase there, meaning that no one has the ability to come to Jesus except it's the Father which sent him draws him, which is why I think in Calvinism it helps affirm a triune establishment of salvation, which is that the Father elects and chooses at the appointed time. The Son has put to the cross one to be saved. He's taken and atoned for the sins, and that it is the Holy Spirit that then operates to then bring upon regeneration and the born again. This is all working in the triune nature of God as a result.
Yeah, and no, and I agree with you that God does draw us in. I'm just highlighting the fact that we have the choice, and even in
Mhm.
Joshua, the choice was there. So even
Yeah,
it says Romans 13:2, it says, consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. So again, God
right.
set the path, people are rebelling, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Or
Mhm.
in it says right here, John 1, 12 to 13, yet all who did receive him, to those who believed his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or of a husband's will, but born of God. So all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name. Now, you and I are just taking, I mean, we could sit here and I feel like we're splitting hairs because we both taken our own interpretations. I'm not going to become a Calvinist today, and you're not going to become a person who believes as I do with free will libertarianism. And so I think that we've both been able to express our views, though, on these points, and I think we're probably okay with that. And I
Mhm.
think that the people who are watching in the chat, I know that there are a lot of Calvinists following you, and I'm sure they're probably pretty happy with the way that you've expressed yourself today.
Right. But at the same time, let me ask this. Do you believe that I believe in choices and decisions as a Calvinist?
I think that, yeah, well, yeah, you said you believe in choices and decisions, and you referenced a book that you said that also said that you have free choice.
Right. But the book I mentioned earlier was about accountability, but I do believe that any Calvinist in general, I don't know of a single Calvinist besides the hyper Calvinists, which are considered heretics, that affirm that we have the ability to make decisions and that we do make uh,
Well, it'd
choices.
be silly to say that you. I mean, I think it goes against human nature to say you can't make a choice, and you don't have. And it even goes against watching what the human experience is. I mean, if we look out there into Twitter world, we see many people making choices all day long. There are many atheists who've chosen to walk away from God. There are many people who've chosen to walk away from Christianity. There are people who've chosen to become Buddhists or Hindus or whatever they did. So clearly, we all have a choice.
Right. So could you so concerning the time we have, the passage within the Greek, could you comment on that? Because I know you went to the other passages, but is there anywhere within within John 6 or anywhere within that specific context of what's going on where Jesus um is saying anything other than that, no one has the ability, udais dunatai, no one can, which can is an issue of ability versus may I versus can I, which if you were a teacher or have been in class, that was the usual classic example when someone says, can I go to the bathroom or can I sharpen my pencil? You said you can, but the question is, may you? I think with it saying no one has the ability or no man can in that passage, come to Jesus, I think it's clear there that unless the Father draws them, no one can come to him. How do you deal with specifically that verse in that context of what's going on in John 6?
Here's how I deal with actually the whole thing. I think the whole Calvinist view is I look at the Lord as being transcendent. And so when it says he's going to draw us to him and that he has drawn us to him, it's also the fact that he's concurrently in our past, present, future means that while we're walking this earth, he's in the present time. He's immanent and transcendent. He's here with
Hmm.
us and he's also beyond us. So he can see exactly what we've done in our life and the choices we've made. And so we have the choices. We're walking through life one day, and I might say at the age of 35, hey, I think I want to learn more about Christ. And I
Hmm.
open up the New Testament and start learning. And at that point, as I'm opening my heart to God, God is drawing me to him. And God is doing that because it's not because he's preordained that I'm going to make that choice early on before I even walk the earth. It's because he saw me make that choice. He put me in this position. He again, going from the idea that Molinists look at as far as would, should, and could, I could make the choice to follow him based on my general genetic composition and every aspect of my life. And I would make the choice if I'm put on this certain path is another thing that he thinks. He knows that if he put me in different places, maybe my likelihood of choosing Jesus would have been diminished, but he put me in the perfect place so that my likelihood is high. And then he knew because he saw me make the choice. Actually, I was older. I was in my 40s. So he saw at that age that I just really did a 180 from the way I was believing and have started to try to learn as much as I can about him ever since. So he instead of the idea, I think that where you and I differ is the preordaining to me has a time constraint. And because God's not constrained by time, it's almost like saying, okay, here's time A. At time A, God is standing there saying, I am preordaining Stephanie Thomason to come to God. At the age of 42, she's going to find God. That's what's going to happen because I've preordained this decision. She's going to go through life, has no choices, but at the age of 42, she's going to come to me. And that's how I view Calvinism versus I'm in this life and he's positioned me in a certain way. And as I'm moving through life, God knows because he's concurrently, again, outside of time and inside of time, he sees the age of 42, exactly what happened and exactly the situation that he presented before me and all of the clues that he gave me that actually blew me away. And so he knew because he's again outside of time. And so I think that my whole thing with Calvinism is I think it's crushing God into this time, this linear time that we're locked into.
Well, I would disagree with that. Of course, I think that God is able to be, past, present, future. That He's everywhere within the times, and that He's able to do so while also um, preordaining every event that's happening from past, to present, to future that has occurred. So, I mean, that's just how I would view it. But we're out of time at this point. I do want to thank you for coming on. You definitely been this definitely was a lot more interesting than I would have thought that the conversation would have gone to, especially going to the fact that we went to various other topics in the long run. There's someone that's in the live chat, Heather Mary Schultz.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
she's my friend. Hi, Heather.
Yeah, she's made some. She said she's definitely saying some things about limited atonement that seems that I definitely would want to comment on, but I couldn't exactly do so considering the conversation that we were having a focus. So if you want, you can tell her. I mean, if she wants to get in contact with me on Twitter or my email or anything like that, I'd be glad to have her on to discuss that for another episode.
That's great. I want to say I wanted to. Heather is in the live chat. Heather Marie Schultz is her name, and she's a seminary student. She's actually at Southern Evangelical Seminary, and she's earning her master's degree, and she's accumulated a lot of knowledge. And she'd be a great guest to have on. Sonia Matskas has also been in your live chat, and she's another. I told you how 16. I have 16 friends in a little direct message, and those two are two of them, and the third one was Craig Reed, and he also came in here. So I was really excited to see those three, that they were able to find the time today. And I see also one of the persons who does not like me, but he's there. It's also nice to see him. Hi, Amateur Exeget. But anyway, he's a big fan of yours. I know that.
Yeah, he definitely asks a lot of interesting questions. He came on the Ask RC Apologist the other day, and um, I unfortunately wasn't able to answer one of. I only answered one question versus he apparently had a lot more that was complicated on some topics. But I do like the discussions that me and him have. Another guy that's on Twitter by the name of the Westminster Wolverine. Yes, we have a very interesting group of anonymous Calvinist people. Like you have a Calvinist or Reformed Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation. We have Bucky Reformed, who's supposed to be a Calvinistic Winter Soldier from Marvel. The Reformed Doctor Who. We had Calvinist Goku and Presbyterian Chi-Chi. We have the more famous one is Calvinist Batman, who has his own podcast. So we have like a bunch of interesting folks with their own deals on there. But there's a guy named Westminster Wolverine who is a Liberty University student and is a expert of textual criticism and history. So me and him usually converse a lot with Amateur because that's usually his thing that he likes to go over, which I'd much rather prefer him versus some of the people that I dealt with last night concerning certain atheist critics. I'll just leave it at that.
Now you've got me curious. I'm going to have to go look at your Twitter feed.
Yeah,
I have to say, I've seen you, I've watched your interactions every so often. I was a little afraid to come onto your channel because I was afraid that you and I, when I talk to Christians, I like to try to unify our message instead of identify. I mean, we identified a lot of divergent points today, but I think we're able to look at some of the core messages. And I think that we came to a lot of agreements, even though we both have different views on the whole free will versus determinism idea.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's people that I have that are that I'm friends with, and I would fellowship with. In fact, a person I usually go street preaching with and handing out tracts is a Assemblies of God. So he's definitely different on the perspective, but we agree on the essentials and such. And I pretty much don't just limit myself to simply Calvinist, but I think as I've stated before, that I think to me it's sad that people are willing to for the sake of just simply seeming smart and going for arguments that would destroy atheism, they're willing to compromise and abandon biblical-based view towards getting towards apologetics, that most people just want to do it to make people seem atheists feel dumb. Literally, that's the only reason they said that they do it, as well as they just want to learn, and they're willing to go to abandon their Protestant faith to go learn Catholic based arguments and such. So I think that to me, that's why I've been either a fan of a more newer method of apologetics known as tactics, as well as even presuppositionalism being another apologetic method that I endorse versus some of the other ones which have been used in more of the sense of being for trying to fit down with a natural man or such, or trying to even appease other religions out there. And I think that would be compromised to simply try to be in an ecumenical movement with other religions and such. But anyways, that's all the time we got. I gotta get going so that way I can clean up more around the house, as well as get to checking on my nephew who managed to get back from the lake house. So this has been a good conversation. Thank you for being on here, SJ. And as always, be sure to tune in for the next time we do one of these shows. Till then, this has been RC Apologist. Take care.